purpose of our learning, I'm kind of see it for Shlema. Everyone that needs. We're starting on top of Gimel. The truth is that the Yerushalmi doesn't work with Daf. When you look up, I mean, it has a page and it has a page number, but when it's referenced, when it says Yerushalmi, when you want to reference a Bavli, you would say, I don't know, Yevamas Daf Samach Aleph, something. When you want to reference a Bavli, you don't Yerushalmi, you don't say Shekalim Daf Gimel. You say Shekalim Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph, and the reason is because the prints of the Bavli of the Yerushalmi are not standardized. So you can only get it based on which halacha. Now halachas work with mishnayos. So right now we're holding in Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph. Today we're going to do Perek Aleph Halacha Beis, and Bezras Hashem Halacha Gimel also. But anyway, because we're learning the Daf Yomi, so we do a page a day based on the Vilna Shas. So that's how it works. But otherwise you get lost. They say, can you help me find this? I don't know where this is. And it's referenced different. We mentioned in the Mishnah that on Rosh Chodesh Adar, we made an announcement for the Shekalim and for Kalayim. On the 15th, read the Megillah in the walled cities. You fix the roads, the wider roads, and the mikvahs. And you do everything that the community needs. And you also set up markers for graves. And then they would go out on Kalayim as well. So we have to explain what's going on here. So, all of these things were performed on the 15th of Adar. Elu hein tzarchei harabim. Sounds like we're quoting a brisa somewhere. Actually, yeah, it's a Tosefta in Maid Katan. Elu hein tzarchei harabim. These are the public needs. Danan dinim mamanis. They do the court cases, the civil disputes. They have to take care of them. Otherwise, they'll push things off forever. And that's not right for people. And they were pushing off things because due to Corona, the courts weren't in session. So people lose out. So there has to be how long can they push it off for? So that's it. By the end of the year, it's got to be taken care of. This is the end of the year. It's the 15th of Adar. Dini nefashas. Also, capital punishment cases. Dini makas, judgments that have to do with lashes. They have to take care of it before the end of the year. It's not right. People should go in to Pesach and they have unresolved. I'm sorry? Oh. Try, see what happens. Say, hey, I'm impressed. So, also with lashes, upaydin erkin. An erech is when someone says, I want to donate a person's value to the Beis HaMikdash. So it doesn't actually mean redeem, but it means that he has to pay it up. The charamim, this is a redemption. Someone can donate something to the kayanim, and then he's supposed to give the value of that, or of whatever it is. And hekdeshus is if someone donates something to the temple doesn't need, I don't know, a bunch of shoes or whatever. So they sell it and they take they redeem that and they take the value. Yeah. Haramim possibly is a gift to the Kayanim now, but it's basically the same concept where it's some sort of dedication that needs to be redeemed, given and redeemed. Now, Mashkenes Asaita is a little surprising. In general, all of these things are surprising. That why are they being pushed off at all? But let's say they were. That's the Saita is a woman that was secluded with another man after being warned by her husband not to. So she's prohibited from being with her husband until it's resolved. Is she innocent? So they give her this water to drink, and that would prove her innocence. Now, this had to be taken care of before the end of the year. Sarfin Asapara, according to I think the Rambam writes that there were only 9 paradumas. So this is also a little surprising. This after, so they burn the paraduma on the 15th. Now, they have to take it. They're running low on paraduma ashes and water, so they burn it by the. What's surprising is that it's like saying a yar and a mitzvah. I mean, they only had the Beis Hamikdash was around for 800 years. Okay, the first Beis Hamikdash, second Beis Hamikdash, 800, and they would do it on Rosh Chodesh, on Tesla Vadar. It was only done, 8 times. So okay, and it had to be exactly that. Okay, the orphan egla rufa. This is if a person passed away in between cities, and the closest city has to take responsibility for that, and they measure out and they break the neck of a calf by this river valley. Writes an Evid Ivri that decides that he wants to. Yeah, I don't know. He decides that he wants to stay as a slave. Today it happens all the time. If they're in prison, people are in prison for a while like to go back. They do things to get themselves back, and life is too hard out here if you're not used to it. So writes an Evid Ivri. This is the slave that says, I want to stay as a slave. They have to put an awl through his ear. Oh, thank you. Okay. You see, I have a coffee already. I made over here. They would purify the Mitzvah. I thought that the Mitzvah was supposed to do this right away. Apparently, it could get postponed, but it's not supposed to get postponed past. They would pronounce him tahar, and then he would have to go bring his sacrifices, and that would include the 2 birds. One of them is slaughtered, and the other one, the wing is is put into the blood and the water that's there, and so there's a whole process. It's not supposed to get postponed. Mefarkin esaminol me'al gabi hamayim. They would remove the lock that was over the water. There was a cistern or cisterns that would collect water during the winter that was there for the summer use, because they needed water in the summer. So they would take off the lock over the cistern. No one was supposed to be using this water during the winter. It was busy collecting. Now it was removed and it was allowed to be used. Ve'in machzirin, I say, and they don't put it back on, I guess, until the next winter. Taman taninan. Over there it was taught. It was regarding Chol HaMoed. There's the Taman and Mayid Katan. Mashkin beis hashlocha mitzayin al akvaris. That on Chol HaMoed, you're allowed to water certain types of fields. There would be a loss. Really, on Chol HaMoed, you're not supposed to do work. However, if there's a loss, you're allowed to do work. You're allowed to do work, things that are relevant for Yom Tov. You're allowed to cook, and just like on Yom Tov, you're allowed to do more on Chol HaMoed. There's more exceptions on Chol HaMoed. That's what you're allowed to do. But if there's so certain things that you're allowed to do in Mayid Katan is about Chol HaMoed. So it says that you're allowed to water these types of fields, basically shlachim, fields that are irrigated. And you're also allowed to put markers up on graves. Now the problem is, like Vartzino Me'adar, what are you doing, Chol HaMoed, putting markers on graves? 1 month ago, in middle of Adar, they already put markers on graves. It says Mitzayin Asakvaris. It wasn't in this list in the Brisa, but it was in the Mishnah. The Gemara says, "V'tipaser." Tipaser is a Hachamay Skinan of the Yerushalmi. Tipaser, let it be explained that she yored sheter fil b'sham v'shatru. Okay, it got washed away. That's at the end. At the end of the Mishnah, the last two phrases of the Mishnah. Naftali, you have a question?
Yes. So is this whole list work that's permitted on Kolamoid?
The Taman Taninan was the list of Kolamoid.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, the other thing was just a list of Tzorchei Rabin. I don't know how it came into the Tosefta over there.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank
maybe you're right. Maybe you're right. It says over there that taking off the lock was something that was allowed on Cholamoid. Those were things, yeah, all of those things it seems like were allowed on Cholamoid. Very good. Okay. Shekaya. The Yitzin Afal Kalayim. They would also go out to check on the Kalayim. Kalayim are the forbidden mixtures. So they would check on it. Now the problem is that they already checked on it because they checked on it on the first of the month. Now they're going again on the 15th of the month. Like Adar, have they not already gone out at the beginning of Adar to check on the Kalayim that there should be no Kalayim left? Tipazer, let it be explained. The year was delayed. So knows, yeah, they went out at the beginning of Adar, but when they went to check on the Kalayim, they saw that it didn't actually sprout yet. They couldn't uproot anything because they saw it didn't grow. So they go out 2 weeks later on the 15th, then it's expected to have grown. So we're talking about that if it didn't grow on Rosh Chodesh, then they go out again on the 15th to check. Minayin L'tziyin. It's a very general question, fundamental question. Where do we know from the Torah that you have to put up a marker on a grave? Good question. Well, we say that you have to put markers on graves, but it's asking like a very basic question, like who says? So, yeah, Reb Brechia, Reb Yaakov Bar Bas Yaakov, okay. B'Shem Reb Chunya de Bras Chivrin, Reb Yosa, Amrila Reb Yaakov Baracha, B'Shem Reb Chunya de Bras Chivrin, Reb Chizkiya, Reb Uziel, Braid Reb Chunya de Bas Chivrin, B'Shem Reb Chunya de Beis Chivrin. I don't know. They're saying in the name of, or it was said in a different name of the name. Well, the only one that I was familiar with here is Rabbi Yaakov Baracha. Rabbi Yaakov Baracha was, I guess, the son of Rabbi Bar Yaakov. And I think the Gemara said that he sent his son Yaakov. Yeah, the Gemara says Rabbi Bar Yaakov sent his son Yaakov to yeshiva. No, the Gemara Kedushin says that Rabbi Bar Yaakov sent his son Yaakov. He had a grandson Yaakov to yeshiva. That's a story with Abaya with the 7 heads. Remember that? Every time he bowed, another head with this demon. Anyway, okay. So we're looking for a source here for that you have to put a mark on the grave. It says V'tami Tami Yikra. He's pronounced, or he should call out Tame, talking about the Mitzayra. So the Mitzayra is Tame, but he has to let everyone know that he's Tame. Aha. The Tumah should call out to you and say, separate. That means that we have to know if something is Tame. So you have to set up a marker to show that it's where the Tame is. Rabbi Ila b'shem Reb Shmuel bar Nachman. Oh, okay, interesting. Usually in the Bible it's Reb Shmuel bar Nachmani. But we had it before Reb Shmuel bar Nachman. Well, we had a Reish Shin Beis Nun. I thought it was a Shmuel Bar Nachmani. Apparently, it's a Shmuel Bar Nachman. It says, "Va'avru ha'ivrim ba'aretz." The people will pass through the land. Bara etzem other. I think this is talking about after the war of Gog and Magog. And they'll see a bone of a man, a bonetz litzion. They'll build a tzion on it. Okay. Now let's take a look over here. We're going to go through this verse that's in Yecheskel. We'll discuss word for word. It says they're going to find a bone of a man and they'll build on it a grave. So the bone. First, let's discuss the bone. Etzem, they find a bone on the ground. Here we see that you have to put a marker up if you find bones. How many bones? Well, the rabbis tell us it's a reiva hakav, a quarter of a kav. Remember, we used that concept yesterday, reiva hakav and kalayim. A quarter of a kav of bones. What's a quarter of a kav? A kav, I think it's 24 eggs. 6 eggs. The size of 6 eggs. Okay, it's not so much. So that needs a marker on it, like a gravestone. A gravestone is actually not what we're talking about here. This is a gravestone. I think it's called a nefesh in the Gemara. Here we're talking about just a marker. It's just a rock that they would put lime. Well, as we'll see in a minute. Adam, if they find a man on the ground, they have to put a marker up if they just find the spine and the skull. Even though it's not a full body, and even if it's only considered one bone, a spine isn't really one bone. But if they don't find all the ribs or whatever, and the feet, the arms, just that it already requires a marker, as if it's a grave. Ubana. The verse also says that you build. You can't just put up a little pebble. It has to be a stone that's going to be set in place, that's not going to roll around. Of course, or else it's going to be fine stones rolling around. Yeah, here's a grave here, a grave here. The Kainim will go crazy. Right? Im Amar At Al Gabi Eben Telusha. If you would say that you use a stone that's movable, then it's going to move to another place. Okay, the next word was etzloi, next to it. L'makim tahara. Where do you put the stone? Do you put it directly on top of the grave, or do you put it on the side of the grave? It says you put it on the side. Don't put it directly on top. Why? Because if a person doesn't notice until he gets on top of the stone, he'll already be impure. He stepped on the stone already. We're not talking about a huge gravestone. We're talking about a small flat stone. But it's not movable. But he's going to. I'm on a stone. So he has to put it before the grave. That way, if he steps on it, so he's still pure. Tzion, a marker. Mikan l'tzion. Here's the source that you have to put a marker. Now, what is the marker exactly? I think the marker is the lime that they would put on top. They're supposed to use 2 stones. And they would put lime in between the 2 stones. So the stones themselves were not over the corpse. The lime did go over the corpse. The stones were on both sides. Umatza Evan Achas Mitsuyenes Afpishe Makaiman Kain Hamal ala Tame and Yemer Mes Mitsuyan Lahayanasan Tachta. If you find only one stone, and you went on it, then you're considered tamei. Now, 1 second, but the stone was supposed to be on the side. You say, yeah, well, this person only used 1 stone. He didn't do it right. Maybe he put it directly on top, so he's tamei. But if there's 2 stones that's set up correctly, if someone goes on top of one of the 2 stones, he's still tar, because that was a regular marker for a grave, and the marker only the grave is only in between the 2 stones, not on the stone itself. I think it's the head and the feet. Yeah. Right. Right. Now, let's say let's say the soil between the two stones is plowed. So harinki yechidas. Those are individual stones. Beneim tar, between them is tar, svivasem tame. I have a funny bracket over there that says tar. Svivasem tar. I don't know what that means. I have svivasem tame tar. Okay, whatever it is. Okay. And you have a small parenthesis there? I don't know what that is. So, yeah, that sort of switches things. So, if it's plowed in between, then this is obviously not a regular grade. It's obviously not a regular grade. This is like the guy, they told him, if you see two headlights, then it's a car. Not two motorcycles. So, so here, there's two stones, but because in the middle it's plowed, so it's actually two separate graves. It's not one grave with the marker on two sides. Okay. Tani, ein mitzainen ala basar. You can't put up a marker if it's just flesh. Even though the flesh could be tame, if it had the bone there as well, it could give off tumah. Shemanesaka basar. Maybe the flesh is going to rot, and then you have a marker there, and the marker stays for eternity. These rocks will stay forever. And meanwhile, that flesh was just there for a few weeks, and it's going to decay. So what did you do to everyone because of that? Right? This is you did this marker, an eternal marker for a temporary issue. Rab Yusta bar Shunam boy kumi Rab Mana. He asked the question in front of Rab Mana. Nimtza mitame taris mafreya. If you don't put up a stone there, then if someone went over that area while the flesh was there, then he's going to become tummy. You have to take care of it, the temporary issue. How can you just ignore that? He said, look, either he'll see it or not, but we don't want to mess it up forever. We're going to start burning things because they became impure, because they went over a stone that never hasn't seen tumah in 100 years. That we don't want to do. So it's better not to put up a stone there, even though there's a potential that there's a temporary issue. Okay. Halacha Beis. Mishnah, second Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, originally, when they would uproot the kalayim, the forbidden mixtures that were growing, they would pull out the kalayim. We're talking about rabbis that would walk around and make sure that people didn't plant their grain together with the vegetables or whatever, different grains they can't plant together. They would have to go around and pull things out of the ground and throw it to the side because that's a forbidden mixture. So it's not the Bezdin itself, but it's the messengers of the Bezdin. So they would throw it to the side. Why would they throw it? They would throw it in front of them. They would want to embarrass them. Look at what you did. Don't do this again. Like there would be, yeah. When people started to, sinners increased. So then, they would throw it to the side. And they instituted that if we find kalayim in your field, the whole field becomes hefker. Hefker means ownerless. Confiscate property. Yeah. Yeah, well, it's your first strike, I think. But I think they got a warning. I think they got a warning, and then if they didn't remove it, then they would come. It had to grow 1/200. I'm not sure. I don't remember how they would measure 200. Okay, why would they? What was going on over here is that they would pull it out of the field. We're going to see in a minute what was going on, but basically the owner was getting some sort of benefit. They would say, "Yeah, why should I go and pull it out? The rabbis will be here; they'll take care of it. Why should I kosher my kitchen? Right? The rabbis are going to come around and make sure everyone's kitchen is kosher." So they instituted that if you do that, all your matzah gets. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara is going to explain what's going on in the Mishnah. Tani Amar Rabbi Yehuda was taught. Rabbi Yehuda says, they would rejoice doubly when the rabbis would come around to pull out the forbidden mixture. Achashim and Achim said the same. Well, first of all, they would weed their field. So I'm not going to pull all this out. The rabbis will come around. They'll do all the weeding. They'll pull it out from the roots, and it's for free, right? And then they say, and not only that, but they throw it to the side. The animals will go and eat it. I have food for the animals now. But then the Iver Avera, the sinners increased. They would throw it to the road. In other words, not for the animals. But nevertheless, the same. The owners were still happy. They were happy that their field was getting weeded. Right? They want to preserve the nutrients for the things you want to grow. Hiskino, they were lazy. The rabbis are going to come around anyway. Hiskino, they wait for the maid, right? So they made the whole field hefker. Yeah, you think about these things. And a lot of the punishments that we have are actually, for someone that's a sinner, he actually benefits from that. They say, if you continue this, you're going to get suspended from school. He's like, great. If you continue, you're going to get expelled. He's like, even better. That's right. Okay. Minayan, from where do we know shehefker best in hefker? We have a question over here. There's a rule that you have to tithe your produce. You can't. If Hashem gives you grain and things grow, vegetation, you have to share it with the poor and with the Levi, and the Kohen has to get some. What about ownerless things that came from ownerless property? So that is exempt from Meiser, Tumas and Meiser. Now, theoretically, someone could do a trick over here. He could make his thing ownerless and then acquire it back. There's tricks that could be done. But what about if the Bezdin comes around and the Bezdin makes your property ownerless? What happens then when someone comes and takes it? Let's say the owner comes back and takes it. That's probably what's going to happen before anyone hears about it. He's going to run back and try to acquire it. Now, what's going to happen? He's going to be then exempt from Meiser, from tithing the property. Yeah. So, but it turns out that that's the halacha. Can they leave Kalayim? Oh, I don't know. I don't know if they're allowed to leave it growing. That's a very good question. 1 second. The Moshe is asking, if they're mafka the field, are they also pulling the weeds out? Are they pulling the kalayim out? Or are they just being mafka? Right. I don't know. Okay, let's take a look. We're talking about now hefker bezdin hefker. Can the court confiscate? No, it's not confiscate. It's make your property ownerless, and to the extent that it removes all of the obligations that would apply if it was possession. Right? The ksiv v'chol asher lo yavei l'shleish hayamim b'atzas hasarim v'azakenim yechrem kol rechusha v'yivdu mikol hagayla. Ezra comes back to the land of Israel, and he starts setting up the rules of what has to happen. He says everyone needs to come. Anyone that doesn't come, all his property is going to become ownerless. Yechrem. I'm not sure if it means it will belong to the Kayanim. I don't know how many Kayanim were there, but there's going to be a punishment. He's going to lose his property. Minayin shiptur min ha'maisros. But how do we know that it's to the extent that he becomes exempt from tithing? Rabbi Yonasan Breder Rabbi Yitzchak Baracha. Shamala min Adav. He says it's from here. Ein ma'abernas hashana loy b'shviyas v'loy b'maitzis shviyas. Im mebrua harezim muberes. V'chaydish echad shu ma'aser loy pater mi ma'aser su. It's an interesting point. He says, look, the Bezdin can establish if it's a leap year or not. Now, they're not supposed to do this. They're not supposed to make a leap year on a Shemitah year because you're prolonging the amount of time that you can't plan. You're not supposed to do it on the year after Shemitah because they used up all the grain, all the old grain, and they had to wait for the new grain for the Chadash to be permitted as an extra month. It's going to be very difficult on them. However, if they did institute an extra month, it is an extra month. Now, there's a rule that on Shemitah, you don't have to separate maestros. Now, you don't really have any grain growing, but if you do have, because it grew from the wind and whatever, so what grew is considered ownerless. You don't have to separate maestros. Now, if the Bezdin adds a month, so there's an extra month of ownerless grain, there's an extra month of pater from maestros. Now, who caused that pater from maestros? It was the court. So by establishing the calendar, we're saying that hefker Bezdin hefker. That's what, when the court says it's ownerless, it's really ownerless. Is there something similar to this in the American law? Uh-huh. Courts do confiscate property all the time. When the person gets it back, let's say there's increased interests or whatever, he has responsible for everything. Okay. Right. 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 No, the kalayim has to be removed, I think. I don't think it has to do with the yeah, I think so. I think so. I think so. I'm not sure. That's a good question. Moshe is asking if you have to remove kalayim from your field on Shemitah, if it grew. Right, it's not your field. I mean, but it's not ownerless, like anyone can take it. It's the produce becomes ownerless. Right? People can share it with anyone who wants. Okay. Ad Kedun Shvius. The Gemara says, okay, we understand why you don't add a month to the Shemitah year because you can't plant. Moitze Shvius Mai. What about the year after Shemitah? Amar Rabbi Avon, Rabbi Bun, Shleilu Rabbi Spisser Chadash. We have a problem if we prolong that year, if we extend the year, and we're not allowed to eat from the new grain for another month. It's going to be very difficult because the 7th year you don't plow. We're talking about making an extra month in the 8th year, and you you can't eat the new grain until the second day of Pesach. So we didn't really know about this because the concept of Yashan in America it's relatively new. We used to have a lot of storage. We would use stored grain. All the grain that we got was old grain, and then we started to supply other countries with grain. And we don't have the same storage that we have. And now we're using the fresh grain every year. So people that are careful on this, they don't eat. They go to a bakery. They say, "Is it yashan or whatever?" We only use last year's grain. We don't use the new grain. Yashan is grain that was from a year ago. Chadash is the new grain. After Pesach, there's no problem with eating new grain. Before Pesach, right now, is when everyone that's careful about this. Usually, Chabad are not so careful, based on the Baal Shem Tov or something. Yeah. Nice doing this. Okay. Reb Zeira b'shem Reb Elazar hada da'at amar ad shlei hitter Rebbe lahavi yarek michutz la'aretz la'aretz. Aber mishe hitter Rebbe lahavi yarek michutz la'aretz la'aretz. He shvius. He shall shashnei shvua. What happened was, Rebbe said, "Don't bring any grain from outside the land of Israel into the land of Israel. I don't want to see any of that soil. That soil is, no, I don't want to see it. I don't want it here. It has tumah in it, even the bones, in the soil. It's no good. Don't bring any grain from outside because it would come with soil attached." So that was originally. But then Rebbe said, "No, you can bring vegetables." I'm sorry, it says vegetables. Then it says you can bring vegetables. Now, once you're allowed to bring vegetables from outside the land of Israel into the land of Israel, then we don't have the same issues of Shemitah or not, because you can bring grain or vegetables from outside. So it would have been okay to extend the year. Well, I guess you can bring it in from the border. Yeah, you have your fields right outside, and you just cross over and bring it in. I think the grain came from Egypt, I'm sure. Okay. Tani Ein Ma'abrim Chulu was taught that you don't make a leap year on the 7th, on the Shemitah year, or on the 8th year. Amar Rav Mana Hadadat Amar Berishena Hashanim Kitikunim. Aval Afshav Shein Hashanim Kitikunim Yishvius Yishashnei Shavua. It used to be, we're talking about the 8th year. If the grain was ready, and you're just extending the year, as the grain ripened in time, and you just add an extra month, and so the people are going to be starving until they can eat that new grain, because they have to wait for the Omer to be brought to be able to have the new crop. So then you're just tormenting the people. But if the grain isn't ready anyway, because it's not ripening on time, so you can extend the year. There's no grain anyway. It's not like you're withholding them from eating. Tani shel beis Ram Gamliel ibrua b'motzei shvius miyad was taught that the house of Ram Gamliel extended the year. They made it a leap year on the 8th year. Amar Rav Avon in minada less at shma min haklam. Rav Avon says that if you're trying to bring a proof from this concept of extending the year, if hefker best in hefker, then you didn't tell me anything. So you didn't say anything. Shemar Chaydes Shaviv. You have to guard this month of the spring, of the ripening. Shemrei Shaviv b'chidusha. You have to make sure that Pesach falls out in the spring. So it doesn't have to do with hefker best and hefker. When you do that, you're creating it's not we're looking at, is this a rabbinic law or is this a biblical law? We're saying it's clearly a biblical law. We were asking when the rabbis come in and they say that this property is ownerless, is the person now exempt from? Will rabbinic law remove the biblical obligations from this produce? So that's a very good question. Just because they remove the ownership doesn't remove the biblical. I mean, the biblical obligations are very strong. So now what we're saying is, Rabbi Avon says, you try to bring a proof that the rabbis create the calendar, but that's a biblical law. The Torah says that the rabbis create the calendar and that they're obligated to do that. So that's not a rabbinic law. That's a biblical law. Okay. V'haida. Hada, da'at. Amrina and da. I guess what it means is that rather, what could be a proof? It says from the following: Amrina and da. Gadish shalai lukat tachtav shalai lukat. No, 1 second. What's that ayin? 1 second. Okay. Yeah. Gadish shalai lukat tachtav kol hanegas baratz hari zeh shalanim. What's happening is shalai liket. It's the beginning of Paya. Leket are stalks that have fallen that belong to the poor. So some stalks fell, and the poor, before the poor came to take those stalks, which is they can keep, someone came along and piled up this grain, made like a stack of grain right on top of it. So now the bottom really belongs to the poor, and what's on top belongs to him. So how much of it belongs to the poor? So the Mishnah says, anything that's touching the ground belongs to the poor. This is the opinion of Beis Shammai. Now, there's a machlekes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai regarding hefker. It says like this: if it would be according to Beis Hillel, you see there's a problem here. There's possibly more grain that's being given to the poor than what was originally theirs. Now, what the poor are allowed to take is exempt from tithing. So if you give them more than what's really allotted for them, then that extra they need to tithe. So if I say that hefker best and hefker, then fine. I say that hefker best and hefker, that the best makes it ownerless, so then and they're exempt anyways. So great. But if I don't say that, so then there's a problem. So Beis Shammai held that a person can make something hefker on his own, and Beis Shammai was more lenient in this regard about making something hefker that it becomes exempt from tithing. Because if it would be Beis Hillel, then the poor that would be taking that lower level of the grain would have to actually tithe it as well. Rabbi Yossi says, I heard that even Beis Hillel would agree with this, and it has to do with the knas. That means the Chachamim made a knas on this person, that he loses the lower level of this haystack. It's not a haystack, a grain stack. And he put it on top. He didn't clear it away first. So because of that, he loses that. And so therefore, we see hefker best and hefker. Should we do the Mishnah? Yeah, let's do the Mishnah. It says, B'chamisha Asar, on the 15th, they would set up tables. Now, tables is a term that was used for a banker. A banker had a table. And what would he do? He would exchange money. Now, people were coming to give their shkalim. They had to give a half a shekel. That's a head tax. They had to give a half a shekel, so they would have to exchange their coins to get the half a shekel. So the bankers would sit there on the 15th, ready to exchange in the Medina. This is in the country. On the 25th, Then they were already settled in the mikdash. It probably doesn't mean the base of mikdash itself. It means outside. Mishiyashvu b'mikdash ischil mashkin. Once they sit in the base of mikdash, the money changers are in the base of mikdash. Then they start to take collaterals. It's more than a collateral. Is it a collateral? What it's called? They would take if someone didn't give, they would say, okay, so yeah, what was it? A collateral. They would say, well, give something to show us that you're going to pay up. So, esmim mashkinim. Who would they give? Who would they take a collateral from? Leviim, Yisraelim. Thank you. Vegerim. The Levites, a regular Yisrael, a convert. Everyone had to give. Avodim mishachrarim, slaves that were freed. Avalai nashim v'avadim ketanim, but not women, servants, and children. Now, the term children here is going to be a little confusing because it's going to be from the age of 20, I believe. Millennials. So, any father that once gave for his children, he's not allowed to stop, though. The Kainim, you didn't take a mashkin. Yeah, you wanted to be on good terms with them. Amar Rabbi Yehuda says, Hey Ben Bukhri b'Yavna. Ben Bukhri testified in Yavna. Yavna is the place that the Sanhedrin went when, at the time of the destruction of the temple, they had to leave that area. So they went to Yavna and they went to 10 different places. One of them was Yavna. So he testified, this Ben Bukhri testified, and Rabbi Yehuda saying it over, that Kol Kayan Sheshaikel Eina Chayte. If a Kayan wants to give, he's not a sinner. Sounds a little sarcastic, right? Amalei Rabbi Yochanan Metzake says, Loiki ela Kol Kayan She'eina Sheikel Chayte. It's exactly the opposite. Any Kayan that doesn't give is a sinner, right? El Shakainim Dashim Mikr Zelasim, but the Kainim have a source. What's their source? It says, V'chol minchas Kayan Kol Tia, Leiseyacha. Any meal offering of a Kayan should not be eaten, it's entirely burnt. That means that two people bring a carbon mincha. One is a Yisrael and one's a Kayan. The same mincha, the same meal offering that's brought to the temple. The regular Yisrael, they take out a scoopful, they put it on the altar, and the rest he eats. The Kayanim eat, or however it is. The Kayan brings his offering, and they take out a scoopful, they burn it, and they burn the whole thing as well. This doesn't get eaten. So if that's the case, that the Kayanim need to contribute to all the communal sacrifices, what's going to come out is that anything that a Kayan is involved in is never eaten, it always gets burnt. So it's like this. If we have to contribute with everyone else to communal sacrifices, so the Omer, which is the sacrifice, a grain offering that's brought on the second day of Pesach, Shtei Alechem, which is brought on Shavuos, the Lechem Apanim, which is brought every week. Shalanu, how could it be eaten? It belongs to Kayanim. Well, it's like tax money. It's my money, right? The Kayanim say it's mine. So no one should be allowed to eat it. And obviously that's not so. Obviously we don't need to contribute to the communal sacrifices. That's the Kayanim's claim. And Rabbi Yochanan Metzake doesn't agree, but he says that's their source. Good. Should we go on? I have another few minutes. Ein memashkin es haktan. You don't take a mashkin, you don't take a collateral from the children. But you still demand that they pay. So you don't take a collateral. When is this said? That's only if he has 2 pubic hairs. That means that he's already considered an adult. Talking about he's 13 already. He's not 20. That's what it appears. Then it's not so. If he doesn't have 2 pubic hairs, it's not so. But you don't take a mashkin. Even if he does have maturity, the pubic hairs. They're covered. The Mishnah says that you don't take from the Kayanim. We said Mipnei Darkei Shalom. There's this other version that says because out of respect. Okay. Amra Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Hey Yetchulu. Rabbi Yehuda says that Ben Bukhri testified that the Kayanim are allowed to give, but they don't have to. Amar Brechi, time of the Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. What's the reason for Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai that argues on Ben Bukhri? He says the Kainim do have to give. It says Zeh Yitnu. When it says Zeh, this is what you give. Zeh, this is the gematria of 12. Yud Beis Shvatim Yitnu. All 12 tribes need to give, including the Kainim. Right? 7 and 5. It's 12. Rav Tavi b'shem Rav Amnuna, Kain Meshiven Chachamim l'Rab Yehuda. The Chacham respond to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda was the one that said over what Ben Bukhri said. Chatas Yachid Mesa, ain't Chatas Tzibur Mesa. There's certain times that a sacrifice cannot be brought, so we leave it to die. We can't eat it, we can't slaughter it. It has to be left. Minchas Yachid Kreva Kalo. Minchas Tzibur Kreva Kalo. A communal offering is never brought. Is never entirely burnt. Communal offerings, communal meal offerings are always eaten. So we're telling to Rabbi Yehuda that, what are you telling me, that the Kainim don't have to contribute? Even if they do contribute, it becomes a communal offering. Communal offerings are never burnt, so it's not a problem. The Gemara says, we have a problem. We just asked the question of Rabbi Yehuda on something that Rabbi Yehuda himself doesn't even hold of. And we're asking him, it's like, well, we hold of this, so therefore it's a question on you. How do you do that? He just rejects the whole thing. He says, well, I don't hold of that, so it's not a problem. Ditanan, we have a Mishnah, She'in Chatas Tzibur Mesa. We have a rule that a communal Chatas does not get put to death. Rabbi Yehuda says it does. That means it is possible for it to be put to death. If that's the case, so then all he has to say is that if the Kainim would participate, then there would be a problem. It would be burnt. And he responds, Zulay Nidvas Yachidu, this is not a private offering. And we respond, it's as if it's a communal. The question is, when they give the coins, does it become, is the communal offering a bunch of individuals that turn into a communal offering? And is the Kayan still there? Is his identity still there? Or is it, there is no individual here, it's totally communal, and there is no Kayan here, it just becomes the community. Okay, it says, Ksiv kol ha'ivra ala pikudim. Anyone that passed over the counting needs to give. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemia, it's a machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia, very common for them to argue. Chad amar kol da'avar biyama yitain. One says that anyone that went through the sea has to pay this half a shekel. The Charana Amar, Charana means the other one, right? The Acher, the other one says, Kol davar al pikudaya yitain. Anyone that went to the counting has to give. Man damar kol davar biyama yitain. Anyone, the one that says that anyone that went through the sea has to give. Misayel Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. That proves Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. That says Kayanim, they went through the sea, they have to pay. Man damar kol davar al pikudaya yitain. Misayel ben Bukhri. Anyone that went through the counting of who's going to go to war, that's a proof to Ben Bukhri. He says that the Kayanim don't have to give because the Kayanim didn't go to war. Okay, let's leave it over here. Good day.